Hi there, I'm Caroline Cerrone, and this is episode 2 of the Conscious Creator podcast. So every month we feature a different artist who has some sort of greater purpose to what they're creating, and we feature people of all sorts of backgrounds, artistic styles, and today we have Logan Piercey. So I know Logan through playing in his band as his bass player, but one of the first people that I met in Nashville and have gotten to know so much about his music that I just wanted to share a little bit about what he's doing because it's so powerful and authentic and special. So Logan,
thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us today. So Logan is a singer and a songwriter, and he does so many different genres. One of the things I've always loved about playing with Logan is that each song will be a completely different genre in a set list, but somehow like still manage to make sense together. And whenever we get feedback from the audience, people always say like, oh my gosh, we got like a little bit of everything. And yet somehow it all still worked together.
Yeah, I love experimenting with different styles because like I mainly float around like kind of like indie folk, indie pop, but I love like kind of soul and like rock music, a little bit of country.
Totally.
Yeah, sometimes it's a little all over the place, but it's hard to stick to one thing for me.
Yeah, like Gold, that's got like a little bit of that like soul feel to it. A new one coming out, Half of Mind, like stay posted for that release, but that's got like almost like a Mumford and Sons feel to it for me, very folky. Some songs are very Americana, like some are like pretty heavy hitting, like Sleep. That one reminds me of like it's like a bluesy, gritty rock tune.
Yeah, that's like my swampy song.
Yeah,
swamp rock.
Yeah, I love that. It's so good. And so I wanted to talk about some of the ways in which you really belong here on Conscious Creator podcast. There's always some like greater themes to your music. What I really hear is a lot of talking about family, like that's shows up in a lot of the songs. And because of that, it brings a lot of heart into the songs and makes it very relatable because like we all have these deeply complex relationships with our family. And there's also really a lot of nostalgia. You're a very reflective person. A lot of the songs are written as a memory, and I love the maturity that brings into these songs because you're able to look back and have a more mature perspective about things. And I can see that, you know, you're less judgmental, just like an observer and a storyteller, and it makes it far more relatable as a listener.
Yeah, I started writing music back in like 7th grade, and going through some family shit. It's like that's kind of music was my outlet for and writing about family was a great way for me to express myself. And if like I have music from that era, like online, and the music then was about family, but it was a lot more.
Are you talking about Doubt?
Yeah. This album Doubt I put out in high school. And the songs on that are a lot more in the moment, definitely more judgmental.
Yeah. I definitely get like an All-American Rejects vibe from the way that you're singing and stuff, which is super cool. But I think that kind of goes with that edginess you're saying with the state of mind also like plays out sonically with like the style of music you were creating at that time.
Yeah. Well, I had never taken vocal lessons then, so I definitely was not a very good vocalist.
It's cool. Like it's just different. And
my music's definitely
very popular back then, that style.
Yeah. I love All American Rejects. I grew up with that. So my music was definitely at that time, that was kind of where it was coming from. But nowadays it was like, some of the songs on Doubt, you could hear the more Americana folky influence coming in, and those are the songs that I wrote last for that album, because I was starting to get into that music, and that's kind of where my music has taken me now. And now the lyrics are, it's still about family because that's a big part of who I am, but it's definitely more reflective on like where I've come from and the people, trying to view the people I grew up around from like a, not an angry at them, or more trying to put myself in their shoes. And so that's kind of where my music is at now.
Absolutely. And I love how you're not afraid to dive into deep topics like that have a lot of maybe even trauma associated with them, like addiction. You know, addiction is a family disease. You know, it affects everyone who, you know, whether, you know, you have the disease of alcoholism or some substance abuse. It's not just you, that it's not just that person that suffers. It affects everyone. And, you know, it can cause codependency. It can cause all sorts of other family rifts and stuff. So I love that, you know, you kind of, explore your music as a way to, you know, process your own experience. And there's some really cool synchronicities and like interesting stories that you embed into your songs through that, but also that you're vulnerable enough to share that with others who like could be going through the same thing, but, you know, aren't giving a voice to that, you know, like feel there's just like a lot of secrecy surrounding addiction in general. So like, thank you for, you know, sharing your story.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with alcoholism in my house. So, I mean, you can't avoid it forever. And my music was definitely more coded back when I was started writing about it, less upfront about what I was talking about. But now that I have some distance from that time, and it's easier for me to be a little more upfront about like what's going on in my music. And
absolutely, I think that like comes through in like that reflective, nostalgic quality to the way that you write your songs. It like seems very much like a diary entry and a release.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's absolutely a release for me. Yeah, I mean, my dad was a heavy drinker when I lived with him back in like high school, middle school, and you know, a lot of anger came from growing up in that sort of household. But I remember this like one moment, going through like his car, because he like, you know, trying to find like a hidden alcohol bottle that he would put in the garage or something, and I ended up finding like his diary at the time. And he would occasionally go to like AA meetings, and this was the diary for that. I remember like seeing this one page where he was just so angry at himself, which was weird for me because he always projected and he always never took any blame. But then seeing in writing how he actually felt about himself was like, oh, this is like, he's a real person who is really conflicted. And that was like, I don't want to say that was like the pivot for me, but it was kind of like, oh shit, like
insight into what's going on inside his own head.
Yeah. And I still think about that, and put that like in my music now.
Yeah. Like I think part of the disease, you know, like, the inner monologue is the thoughts, and how you treat yourself and how you think about yourself. And, like you're saying, it's like, you know, I also come from, you know, a background of addiction, you know, within my family, and then also, you know, with people that I've gotten close to in my life. And, you know, it's always, you know, at first it was complicated and it was difficult because I felt, like you were saying, a lot of projection. Like I didn't realize that was what was going on at the time, but I felt like I was being punished a lot. And I always like felt like I could be like a savior and could help someone else, you know? So that's codependency, you know? You think you can control someone else's life, you can control their behaviors, their patterns, and you just can't, you know? But, I kept on like trying to help others so much that, you know, it just made me feel so worn out. And so like, I was ultimately neglecting myself, and not meeting my own needs because I was just focused on others all the time, which is like not the way to fix anything, and it's just a very flawed way of thinking. But like you're saying, it was really hard to get that insight of what another person is going through. And now that I'm like working, I also work at a rehabilitation center for teenage boys. It's so incredible and insightful because I get to really talk to people that are, going through a lot with their own, disorders or diseases. And it's, they have vulnerability around certain things. They're not a fully formed like adult where they have as many defense mechanisms. Some of them have like a lot of defense mechanisms and it's really hard to reach them. But how healing it's been to see, what it's like inside, like an addiction, that kind of insight, and how it's like really like, yeah, it is someone suffering a lot, and yeah, like anything that they project is really 100 times what they're doing to themselves on the inside.
Yeah, when you're young and a kid, and you kind of blame yourself, like you kind of start like you're in denial, like you don't believe that like someone around you is gonna have this problem or an addiction. Then eventually, this turns. At least for me, it was anger for a long time, and then eventually you can start seeing them in a different light, in a light that they're not just this like entity that's causing you harm. They're a person who has this whole struggle they're going through, because certain parts in your life you're gonna kind of have those similar struggles, and that point will give you some empathy for what happened in the past. So
I think that's like really clearly evident with like some of your songs, like definitely in Yellow House. And I'd love to kind of like pick your brain a little bit more about like what that's about. You said also Gunstock. It also has a lot of those themes in there, but the way that you write is with there's such warmth to those songs. And so like talking about trauma and things that have had so much wounding, like it's evident within the music that like a lot of compassion, forgiveness, self-acceptance, a lot of healing has been done just by listening. And I think that listeners can pick up on that too. Like it's a healing thing to listen to.
It's definitely healing for me to write these songs and record them and put them out. So I'm glad that translates for other people too.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, do you want to tell me about Yellow House first or Gunstock? Which would be, make more sense chronologically?
Maybe Yellow House.
Yeah.
I can give
a little synopsis maybe.
Yeah. So, I mean, the house I grew up in Massachusetts, we ended up moving out of it. We had to sell it because my dad lost his job because of his alcoholism. And so I ended up living with my mom for a few years. And then we ended up moving back onto that same street, just across the street from the house I grew up in.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. And it was odd because, like having so many like good memories, but a lot of not so good memories there. And then every day you kind of gotta think about them.
When you think of moving, it's always like this idea of like a fresh start. You do all these things to get rid of old things and pack up what you don't need anymore. And when you just move to the house like across the street or next door, and it's like doesn't carry the same like associations,
Yeah. And like a funny little story was like about a month after we moved there, my mom was part of like that town Facebook group, and someone posted like, hey, like we live in this house, like we just moved here kind of recently, and we noticed like this door frame has all these markings on it for like these two boys, Connor and Logan, growing up, like their heights.
Oh my gosh.
And
that was
like,
you?
Yeah. It ended up being the people who lived in that house. And so they ended up like cutting out that part of the door frame and giving it to us.
That's really cool.
Yeah. But it was just kind of like, oh, we just moved here. And now like we're literally getting these like physical memories like brought back to us. So that moving back there, thankfully I was in college at the time, so I was only there for the summers, but it was odd being back there. So yeah, that's where that song, well, eventually the song Yellow House came out of that because...
And is that written in the perspective of your dad, or was that written to your dad?
That was...
Or is that more like a diary entry?
It was written about my dad because that song kind of brought back some anger for me. Because my dad very much lived in the past at a certain point, because my brother and I weren't very close with him anymore. But it was like the only things he could really talk about were the good memories from the past, because it was kind of like the possibility of good memories in the future, at least as a family, were kind of gone at that point. So he was constantly living in the past. And,
right, because like your parents had divorced at this point, or
well, they had separated. It took a few years for a divorce to happen.
And you guys were off at like college, you were saying. So
yeah,
I'm sure he felt like isolated, and I'm sure in a lot of ways isolated himself.
Mm-hmm.
But
due to like money issues and stuff, my mom ended up letting him move back in with her at the new place across the street. Because I was mainly off of college, so I wasn't really there. And I was thinking about that because like he lived so much in the past, and I remember like it felt so weird for me to live across the street from that house. Like that's got to be a different kind of weird for him, because I'm trying to avoid the past as much as I can while he's trying to live in it. So that's where Yellow House came from. It's a song about being stuck in the past, and the I don't know, my fear of doing that too, in like, because there's the line like, I don't want to fall down this rabbit hole you found buried beneath that yellow house, because I saw that he was just in this hole, and he wasn't able to get out of it, and I didn't want to do that. And so yeah, that's where Yellow House came from.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how that's such a relatable thing too, of like, sometimes, there's things we admire about our parents, and then there's often we carry some sort of fear that we're, oh no, I'm just gonna, my mom or my dad or whatever. And it's like the fear that we're just going to relive their life, or
mm-hmm.
I think that's very relatable.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. And I love the, like, what a strange, like, synchronicity. But now that I hear your story, maybe it's not so strange. Like, that to move so close, like, that inability to move on, and how that house was just, like, the perfect metaphor for, his mindset, you know. I moved out to Tennessee, like, 2 years ago, and part of it, like, the reason that I moved, I'm like, it was like a moment's notice type thing. Like within 3 days I was packed up and left LA. Like it was very impromptu, but my parents will be like, Nashville is a great place for musicians. There's a lot of music, and like, if you help us with renovating this house, you'll have a free place to stay. So during COVID, like not having to worry about rent and being in a new city and stuff, it was kind of like, that was appealing, and I just like jumped on it. But during that process, that was such a metaphor for my state of mind, because it was like at least a year of, as this house that I'm living in is in shambles, it's all being like ripped out. The carpets, the walls, the electronics, everything. It was just bones. And that was like such a metaphor for my state of mind, because like during that time, I had realized that I wasn't on the path that I wanted to be on in life. And I was stripping everything away in my own personality to see what wasn't working for me anymore. And in that process of like pulling everything away and recreating something new, I was able to like find a more authentic version of myself and like create a new life. But it was intense. And it's just so strange how the space in which you live in is such a strong symbol for like the space in which you live in your head and your body, you
Oh,
know?
absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
you're going through a move. That's a weird synchronicity too. You just moved this weekend.
Yeah. Another like moving back into a place I used to live at.
Yeah, it was like your family's place. That is weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I moved here to Nashville 3 years ago, and a little less than a year after I moved, my mom and grandparents came down here too, and they bought a house, and it was like I would live with them, and it was for me it was like free rent is like I can't turn that down, um, but then a few months later COVID happened, which kind of was nice because it was nice to have a place to live because I worked in a grocery store, so I didn't want to like go to work and like bring up COVID back to my grandparents. So I took some time off to write and work on music for a little bit and just
hell yeah.
just kind of let my mind relax for a little bit. But now my family's gone and I just moved in to that house because they agreed to not sell it so that I could move in there and hold it. And so I feel very blessed to be able to be in that house now.
And like, how does that feel? Like, I mean, it's a beautiful house and it's like incredible, like to have like such an artistic space too. But like, does it feel like a sense of moving on, like a new chapter beginning?
It does. Definitely more so than moving across the street from my old house.
Yeah.
It definitely feels like a new chapter. I love my grandparents, but they kept that house so hot. Yeah. And so it feels nice to be living in the house when it's a little cooler. And so yeah, I'm happy to be there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I wonder, and like, I wonder what this new context, if there's like another song coming out. Well, I don't know.
Maybe I've been like in a writer's block recently. I gotta get back to writing.
I feel
soon.
it comes in waves.
It does, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about Gunstock.
I think out of any song I've ever written, this is like the most like tragic song.
And it's so interesting because like both you say like Yellow House was unpacking some anger. Gunstock, is tragic, and they're such sweet and like. When you listen to them, they have like a nourishing quality to them. So it's so interesting what you've done with like processing those feelings.
Yeah, thank you. Gunstock. Well, the recording is actually a lot more upbeat than the song ever was before. Because when I started recording it, I tried to make it a little more. I didn't want to record this super sad, this acoustic guitar song. I wanted something a little more. Not anthemic, but a little more upbeat, a little more fully produced, but still keeping that sort of underlying melancholy in it. But yeah, Gunstock, I wrote, I wrote it just after returning home from a trip up to Boston to see my family, and I saw my dad, stayed with him, and that trip did not go well. And literally, like at the airport, my dad drove me, and I told him, like, this is it. Like, this is legit the end of the relationship he and I were going to have, because I given him so many chances, and there were so many ups and downs. But this kind of just felt like the final straw for me. So I told him that. I told him I'm not going to see him again, and I went home. I ended up writing Gunstock like 2 days later. I just kind of woke up and had the idea for it. And like, I think I returned on a Monday. I wrote Gunstock on Wednesday, and on Friday I found out my dad died.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, and it was odd because I wrote that song from his point of view about the relationship he had with me. So that whole song, even though it's really from my dad's point of view. That's why the opening line is. Like, when's the last time you picked up the phone and called me? Feels like we don't talk anymore.
And that's before you found out.
Yeah, that's before. And the last line of that song is, just sing me one more song, then I'll be gone. Which I wrote prior to knowing he died, but it just felt so, like, damn, like that felt like, I don't know, Adam, that was not just me or something. I don't know. I'm not very spiritual, but that was like, holy crap, how that felt little out of body for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's just like such a powerful message for like so many people to hear. Like I've had a lot of issues with, difficult relationships with my family and kind of became estranged with them over time in different ways, just a very distant relationship. As soon as I turned 18, I just wanted to go the other side of the country, went to school, as far as I could be and still be in the same country. And, over the years just became incredibly focused on work and achievement and ambition and all these things that were just kind of, led me to like a more of a sense of independence. But, all of these other relationships and problems were just put on the back burner. And one of the reasons that like I moved, to Tennessee was to be closer to my family and to try and work on some of those parts of the relationships that still had a couple bumps in them and stuff. And so that's become something that I really value now is family. And it's not easy, but it's just one of those things you can't change who you're related to. And you love people, but you don't always get along. Sometimes you don't even like each other, But I just felt like this need that I needed to work something out in this lifetime. And I love that, you write your songs like with these strong family themes. That's like it shows up in so many of them, and because we all share like something having to do with family. Some of us are adopted or fostered or estranged, in all these different ways. But whether it's a close relationship or it's a harmonious one, we all can share this theme.
A family, like, those are relationships that will last your whole life. Even when someone dies, like I'll still be thinking about my dad like in 50 years, said those relationships, they're constantly work. Even when the person's not around, you got to work on how you feel about them in your own way.
Right. And it makes you realize how fleeting time is. Like in normal life, we wouldn't necessarily spend so much time with people of other generations. There can be such generational rifts where you just like culturally, so many things change, and you wouldn't like necessarily get along with like people from like 20 years older than you, 40 years older or younger, But family kind of forces you to process like multiple generations and all the differences that you have.
Definitely.
And it's interesting because you moved into your grandparents' house. So that's like another relationship tied back in. And
yeah. Because my grandparents lived in Kansas and I'm from Massachusetts. So I saw them like once or twice a year, mainly holidays. But then living together was like this whole new,
totally,
like, wow, seeing you every day. That's like, that's new. Cause it's weird when someone's like in your life, but at a distance, and all of a sudden you live with them. You see them every day.
And like what I experienced from that with my parents, like being at the time 29 years old when I decided to move to Tennessee, and I was 28, I think. And being so disconnected and estranged, what happened was like they expected me to be that same person I was when I was 18 years old, 10 years younger and stuff. So this like memory that they'd imprinted on me, and they thought I was that person. And it's like, no, I'm a woman now. And I'm like 10 years, I've like found who I am as an individual,
Did you find it odd, like leaving your family, living on your own, and then living back with them?
Yeah, because like I lived alone for years and stuff. Like I lived with roommates, but like I just wanted to live alone for many years, and I experienced that. And then with COVID, I felt so isolated and so alone. That like there were things I loved about living with my family again, but then things that were incredibly humbling and like very challenging.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
For sure. Yeah, it's definitely everything you do is a little different when you in the house, same house as like your mom or grandparents or dad, whatever it is.
And it's so great. Like, it's like, I think family is such a value to me, something I really like have strong beliefs about. And I think that today that can be something I often see missing in culture, you know, pop culture and like young people, you know, I was missing it. And I can just, that's kind of why I wanted to also talk to you today of like, this is, I think, a really healthy thing for people to talk about is like their issues with their family, you know, to recognize there is no perfect family and it's still valuable to have people in your life that you have complex relationships, and it's worth it to put the work in and do these things, and we should always be growing, you know. And like family is challenging for a reason. I think that like we're stuck with our family, like, so we're given the exact right thing that is meant to like make us evolve as a human being, you know.
I mean, it's like interacting with like a bunch of different versions of yourself, because you're all similar to each other, but it's like your differences can be, because you're so similar, your differences are like the riffs that can be harder. Yeah.
And like part of what you were saying before of like that fear of turning into that person, it's like we do a lot of projecting where it's like sometimes we're so similar that we see something in someone else, and it's not always even family, but we're like, oh, I dislike this quality. But really, we recognize it in ourselves, and it's something that we want to reject because we can't stand to acknowledge that this is also something that we do, you know? Yeah, very
I frequently
humbling.
have those moments where it's like, oh my God, like this is just like my mom, or this is just like my dad. Like,
yeah, it's good to turn the mirror and be like, wait, am I like this? Do I do that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to talk to you about Boys because I love that song. It's so fun to play live with you too. Like the bass part's really cool, so I like enjoy it as a bass player. And we got to do that little live music video where we played as a duo. Yeah,
with the stand-up bass. That was really cool.
That was cool back in like November 2021. And or was that September? I think it was
we only
released,
known each other like a month at that point. Yeah,
I think it was released in
November. Yeah.
But such a cool song, and I love how it kind of ties together a bunch of the different themes that we've been talking about. Like I love that how it's all about like boys, stay boys, you know, like don't be too quick to grow up, just enjoy where you're at right now. And
Gunstock and Yellow House are those songs about my dad, like 100%. Boys though he's in that, but it's about me and my brother. It's based off things my dad would say to us. But I have 7 younger cousins who are all boys. And they're all younger than me. So like there's like cutting my brother in my eye, it's like 9 of us, like the youngest in the family are all boys. So yeah, that song is just based off things my dad would say to my brother and I growing up, things that just like life advice. Because like the main line of that song is boys, stay boys for as long as you can. And like, I know you're tempted to be a man, but because I felt like growing up with my dad, it's not that I had to grow up faster, but it was sort of like I, dealt with trauma and sort of like a bad experience like earlier than I would want for a kid. So I felt like I had to grow up a little bit faster because of that. So, but when you're a kid, you want to be an adult because you want to have the privileges an adult has. But that song is kind of like when you are an adult, you're going to look back and be like, you kind of want to go back to being a kid again. So that song is about just holding on to those years for as long as you can.
I'm going to pause for a quick break so that we can play a little bit of Boys for you, get a little taste of what we're talking about, and we will be right back.
It all goes by so fast. Boys, it's okay to slow down sometimes. Boys, don't let these days pass you by. I know it's tempting to be a man, long as you can. Boys, it's alright.
Okay, and we are back talking to Logan Piercey still about his single Boys, which is such a great song. I've really enjoyed playing it live with him. And I think that the song has gained a lot of new meaning to me. Like I said, working at a rehab facilitation for teenage boys. So it's like we've been talking about addiction. We've been talking about, reflecting and like now this idea of boyhood. Cause like I just see these people, they're ages 13 to 18 and I just see them as little boys, and they're going through really intense things. They're away from home for sometimes months at a time, sometimes like 6 months straight, not seeing their families, going through really intense things through treatment, where the process of recovery is like one of the hardest things anyone will ever do, I think, if that is, for codependency, if that is for addiction, whatever, because it involves so much reflection and introspection and is mentally, emotionally exhausting, And these are just kids, working on themselves, gaining these new coping skills and processing skills. And it's just like, I have such respect for them dealing with that at such a young age. And so many of them have been through such trauma that you're like, no person should ever have to go through that, let alone someone who is still a child, So they want to be seen as adults. They're doing very adult things very often, and they're in this rush to grow up. And the way I feel about them and see them is just like they are just such sweet, innocent people, and they were just in such a rush to grow up. So that song to me, like I want them to listen to that and gain some of the message. But for me, I think it's also really insightful for, other people in my life, that seeing sometimes adults, seeing the inner child in them, seeing like them as a boy or, as a like young girl or whatever, it allows you to see like what someone has been through and be more compassionate towards them. Like there was one meditation that I love by this woman named Louise Hay. She's pretty well known in like the meditation community, but it changed my life when she did this guided meditation where you do a bunch of things to relax and you kind of go into a trance and stuff. But then she has you visualize your parents one at a time, at whatever age, might be like 3 or 5, you get to kind of choose, and you just like see them as this like innocent, soft little person that hasn't like really been exposed to a lot yet. Their purity, their innocence is just perfectly preserved. And at that age, what you see is just such a rawness and authenticity of emotion. When you're sad, you're really sad and you don't know why something is happening to you. When you're angry, it's just like pure anger. Happiness is just purely joyful. So to be able to see anyone in that state just brings about a lot of feelings of understanding and compassion, and allows us to remember like, oh, that inner child is still in there. You can put any age on any person, but at the end of the day, like, yeah, the age is just a number. And so I think also being able to be compassionate towards, all right, dealing with these boys that are in recovery for their addictions. And it's so easy at times to see their innocence and be forgiving and compassionate with them. Why can't I do that with this older person in my life who's going through the same disease, So to me, that song is kind of like about seeing the inner child in everyone and being compassionate.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about the song in that sort of way before. But yeah, like when someone's older, they're sort of like why can't you, like, come on, you're an adult, you gotta work through this. But as a kid, it's like, you want to protect them more. So I think that is a good idea to like kind of view someone as a kid, because I think we all are still to an extent. We all have that kid inside of us still. That's actually a really nice message.
Yeah. We were talking about before this interview how interesting it is. Like, we have our own meaning for songs, and then someone else will get something totally different out of it, and it's like, oh, I didn't even, no, but that's like the cool thing about songwriting.
I love when a song can be any story to anybody. And that's what I like to try to write my music like. I remember back with like my album Doubt in high school, like submitting a song to one of those online, like, grade my song, give me feedback sort of things. And someone was like, I love the lyrics because it's about this like moving to a new city and this whole story they had for it. And for me, it was like, that song did not mean that to me. But I thought instead of being like, oh, they misinterpreted my song, I like it because it's like, oh, wow, they have their own totally legitimate idea of what a song can be. And I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. Yeah. Like, have you ever felt like a song, like the meaning became like it's changed for you over time, or sometimes maybe a subconscious layer to it where you're like, I didn't even unpack that till now, or
that happens quite a bit. Yeah. Most of the songs I write, they mean something when I write them, and then they mean something a little different later on. And I have a new song coming out fairly soon called Half of Mine that is definitely did that for me.
Yeah, what is Half a Mind about? I've always loved playing that song. It's really cool. There's like this like vibe shift in it, and it's got a lot of energy to it. It's crowd pleaser. Good to end on that one.
So yeah, like the other 3 songs we talked about were very much, I went into those songs with an idea of what I wanted to talk about. With Half of Mind, I wrote that with my friends Sam Lina and Campbell Davis. And when you write with more people, especially when it's like very much you're just coming up with it on the spot, it's harder to like kind of have a pregame plan of this is really what I want to talk about. So that song just started with a guitar riff, and I don't even remember how the lyrics even really came about for it, but that song is just about looking back on where you came from. It's again very nostalgic, like the other songs, but it's about a choice you make with your childhood, and if you want to accept that it happened and learn from it, or do you want to hide it and forget about it? And because the main hook line is like, I got half a mind to just leave it all behind, and half a mind to turn back time. Like, part of me wants to go back there and go through it again, but part of me is like, it was, it's painful. Like, I don't want to do that. But ultimately, the song is about going back. And that song, I can't even remember what that write was like exactly in terms of what we were all thinking with the lyrics. But for me, especially, there are some lines in that song that are about my life. There's one line in particular about this cabin in the woods, and that's a recurring image through a lot of my songs. Gunstock has a line about it, because we had this old family cabin up in New Hampshire that my grandfather built along with my dad. They were kind of the main ones who built this old cabin, and it's funny because in Gunstock it talks about, which is written from my dad's point of view, that song is like, it mentions a cabin, like this cabin that my father built. But in Half of Mine, which is about me, I talk about it like it's a cabin that my father built, because both of ours did. Like my grandfather did and my father, but it's kind of like,
I kind of love like the metaphor of like how houses keeps on popping up.
Yeah.
And like generations, and how, we pass down houses, like your parents moving into different houses that like next door, and then you're in your grandparents' house, and like it keeps on showing up in your music and stuff. And I feel that in my own life of like how we pass down mindsets, like frameworks for our existence, even like that being a metaphor for that, and like some of the thoughts, some of our behaviors, like just passed down. My grandfather built this for me, and now I'm living. It's like, but maybe that's our mental processes too, or patterns.
I mean, I think it's a great metaphor for that, but it's also just like, I think a house is almost like another member of your family, because most people will probably live in a few different places, and they're all going to be different in different ways, and kind of reflect like where you're at that point in your life. In that particular cabin, we never lived there. No one lived there. It was more of a getaway skiing sort of place we'd go to. And that was always so comforting to me. And I knew I wanted to talk about that when I wrote about my dad, because it was very, very much tied to him and where he came from, but also it's where I came from too. So it's another thing him and I had in common. So
that's really cool. I love that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Then in the song Half of Mine, the line is like find a place on this mountainside, like one where I can live and die, and I'll build a cabin in the woods. I know I can if my father could.
Yeah, I love how it's kind of like the lyrics to me kind of sound like breaking free of like ancestral patterns and tradition. Like, I'm going to build this house. Like, I'm setting a new path. Like, yeah.
It's new path, but also following in their footsteps, because it's just like my father did. I'm going to pave a new path for myself.
It's beautiful. I think it's a really astute like observation of something that we do, and like expressed in like an artistic way of like how we pass things down, inherit things, personality things, physical things, and when something fits and feels authentic, and sometimes we let go of certain things. We make something new. Like, I like what they did, but I'm going to make it my own, you know? I'm going to be my own person, you know?
I think that goes for a lot of the songs themselves, especially when you co-write, because it's like, I don't think that song means that to Sam and Campbell, who I wrote it with, but that's absolutely what that song means to me.
That's awesome. And it's so interesting because it's like every time like we've played together and like we play live and you'll say something into the mic, it's like I realize something that I didn't know about a song, and I did not know that about that song. And there's been like a couple times where I'm like with boys and stuff, where you're talking about how there hasn't been like a boy in your family for however many, or a girl in your family for however many generations or something. And I'm like, I didn't know that. Like all these like cool things that just kind of like make it so much more impactful.
I mean, a lot of these times when I say something about a song live, even if I wrote that song 2 years ago, like Half a Mind, like I'm still learning new things about that song myself, and maybe certain things are hitting me a new way. It's taken on a new meaning. And so a lot of times when you hear something new about a song, it's because it's also a new to me. Yeah.
I have like felt that about my own songwriting. Like at times I'm like, whoa, like I almost felt like some songs were like prophetic, where I was like, that predicted like a whole part of my life that hadn't happened yet. And it's in the song. And it's like, what's up with that? But I don't know.
I mean, I love that songs can, they mean one thing at one point, and then they mean something else at a different point.
It's so true. And I'm like, what comes first? Like, does the subconscious mind like know certain things, and we're just not hip to it yet? Or is it like, oh, we're like consciously finding, more meaning and seeing it in different perspective because we're becoming a different person, or,
Yeah. I think like with my older music, like on Doubt and stuff, a lot of those songs arguably have like no actual meaning in the lyrics. They've always meant something to me, but I think looking back on it, some of those songs don't mean anything to me anymore. And I can't even remember what I thought they meant to an extent, because I'm I'm so distant from them. My writing wasn't it was new to me writing. So I think I'm trying to get better as a lyricist. And so looking back at my old songs, it's like, damn, that song meant nothing.
Hell yeah.
I don't know. I don't even remember what I thought.
I can relate to that. Yeah.
But no, it's interesting looking back, and I don't know. That's been a conscious, like, trying to write songs that do have a meaning, in fact, and even better if it's a song that could have multiple meanings throughout my life.
Absolutely. So, like, anything you got coming up? You're gonna release some new songs soon. Like, what do you got?
Well, Gunstock, Yellow House, and Boys they're all part of this project about family. And then that song Half Mine's going to come out fairly soon. And after that, I got one more from that family project called Ghost on the Mountain. And after that, I was in the studio a few months ago recording some new stuff, more fun, lighthearted. We'll go back to the sad stuff, but a little more lighthearted sort of songs, a lot more diverse sounding, a lot more soul and more rock stuff versus the folk. So the goal right now is to finish up these 2 songs from this family project and then get those 6 out. And yeah, that'll probably get me through another year here. So
yeah, you're constantly putting out music. How can people find you? What are some of the platforms?
Spotify, big, anywhere you listen to music, you can find it. But Instagram and Facebook, I have a website, just loganpiercey.com, but Spotify and Instagram are kind of my main platforms. I want TikTok. I gotta post on there more.
What would you put on TikTok?
What sort of content?
Yeah.
Like about a year ago, I was putting a lot of covers and stuff, but
cool.
It's been like a year since I posted.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
but I'm Music Boy Logan on TikTok. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, cool. Thank you so much, Logan, for like coming in today and sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's been fun to talk about these songs with someone else.
I feel like I know you and the music like so much more now. So yeah, and thank you for sharing it with the world, because the more that like we put out art that is authentic and real and talks about real stuff, everyone benefits from that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right. See you guys next time.